Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay. Never comes again, another day like yesterday. Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.
Good morning, everybody. I forgot my connector from USB-B to USB-C, so I cannot use my SM7, which means when I've done this before, I get a sound that's quite a bit tinnier. It's essentially the microphone on the MacBook Air. Anyway, is what it is. I'm excited to do this one, and I don't know exactly how to lay it out. If you can't tell, I don't block out or write talking points or whatever. I just start talking. And I've usually done a certain amount of thinking on stuff. But this is one of those that is maybe fits into things your therapist wants to tell you, but doesn't because maybe you're not ready. I feel like this is spiritual, maybe maps onto spiritual truths. Well, I think definitely maps onto spiritual truths as I see them, and definitely has a lot of significance in psychology, and is just a very practical thing to know in your own life. And so let me give you guys a bit of the context. Over the last year, especially since we lost our home to the fire, and I started experiencing these deep dives into my own neurotic content and anxieties and resentments and angers and shame and blah, 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 I discovered that there's this ladder, there's this pathway down underneath all of your content where ultimately everything comes down to you believe something about yourself that's untrue. Anxiety, depression, resentment towards others, hatred, trauma responses, blah, blah, all of it is your body attempting to deal with whatever reality is, being enmeshed with the dynamic that gets created when you believe something about yourself that is not true. Okay, so let me come to, and those beliefs are created by abusive or negligent parenting, or just not even intended negative messages sent by accident by parents who are overwhelmed, by society. Maybe you even have good parents. If you're raised a female, there are lots of messages that your value has to do with your personal appearance and your attractiveness to men. Or there's all of this stuff that's very unhealthy and unconsciously programs people to believe things that are untrue about them. So I was thinking about this the other day, and this is something that I've noticed progressively over the last 10 years as a therapist, that there are people, and I've been this person, I am far less so now, but I've been this person in my life. There are people who may be very intelligent, capable of analyzing things at a complex level. They're reasonable, level-headed people. They don't have unreasonable expectations, but you'll notice them when they attempt to make decisions, even small decisions, but let's say it's large decisions. They'll talk through it and they'll think through it, and they'll sort of play through all the possible outcomes, and they can even rationally reflect that it's like, I know I don't have control, and I can make a choice and find out that I didn't know that it was not the right choice, etc., etc. There can be unexpected outcomes, etc., etc. But they'll sit here and go back and forth, and they'll write a pros and cons list, and they'll consult with a therapist and with friends, and and then you'll sort of notice and realize, oh, this person just goes around and around and around and really has difficulty making a decision about what pardon me, I've got the hiccups, so now you're going to have to put up with that, because once I get them, they stay for at least 3 to 5 minutes, maybe 10. It is what it is. And in the past, if I've worked with someone like this and talked through things for 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, obviously at some point there's going to be the conversation of like, this is has to be a fear-based decision, because there comes a point where you've cooked the external outcomes. You've cooked the possible outcomes of the situation. You've considered everything. You've researched. You've been realistic. You've been realistic about what you can control and what no and what you can't. And so clearly, if you get into that position, and this type of person will get into a position where they'll go, yeah, it seems like, choice B is really going to be the best thing for me. And you go like, yeah, it sounds like it. It all sort of lines up. And then the next time they come back into therapy, suddenly they're telling you why they realize choice B isn't the right choice and that they're leaning towards choice A. And this will go on and on and on, right? So as a therapist, you suss out that it's like, well, what's happening is anxiety is driving this. And they're trying to use the external situation to resolve their anxiety, right? They feel anxious. They feel generally anxious. They feel a sense of not rightness. They feel a sense of impending disaster. They feel a sense that things are not going to go well for them. And they're not actually making a decision about outcome A or outcome B based on whether it seems rationally a reasonable choice to make. They're actually unconsciously or semi-consciously making a decision in the hopes that once they make that decision, they'll stop feeling anxious, and then they'll engage that decision and the outcomes of that and the activity of that will eliminate their anxiety. And since their anxiety is driven by some unconscious process in their nervous system that has nothing to do with reality, at some level their nervous system knows this situation is not going to make me feel comfortable. It's not going to resolve my anxiety. So then, because there's a sense of like, oh, choice B is not going to resolve my anxiety, they'll back out of choice B and start considering choice A. But when they're considering choice A, it's not really about whether it's rational or a smart choice. They are again trying to set choice A up to resolve their anxiety and to make them feel that they've taken a right choice, that their life is safe and that they're safe, and that this was the right thing to do, and that they're going to have a non-anxious experience, right? So in most cases, what these people are doing is they're attempting to choose something that will give them a non-anxious experience and will resolve their relentless, sort of constant, chronic, anxious state. And this is why they can't make a decision, because they're not making a decision based on whether it's a reasonable choice or not. They're setting the situation up to do something that it cannot do, which is to resolve their anxiety. And in their unconscious hope is that it will resolve their anxiety forever, that they will no longer be an anxious person, that they will no longer struggle with anxiety. Now that might start sounding too simple, or you might not see it, but I promise you, as someone who worked with my own condition for 20 or 30 years, and was that person at one point where I would agonize about decisions, is this, is that, and endlessly research, and maybe this and maybe that, and blah, 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 and talk it through, and never quite feel right. But also as a therapist for over a decade, I promise you that when people get caught in those, it has nothing to do with the details of the choice. They're trying to choose something or to find something that they can do that will give them permission to no longer feel anxious. And because there is no external situation that will give you permission to no longer feel anxious, then every choice is fraught, because at some point the nervous system always knows the truth and always tells you the truth. So if you set up situation B to be the thing that resolves your chronic anxiety, your nervous system will go, yeah, but it's not gonna. And then intellectually you'll go, oh, well, so it's not really B. B's not the good choice. And then you go back to A. And you'll start trying to lie to yourself that A is going to resolve your chronic anxiety. But your nervous system is like, no, it won't. And so then you'll be like, oh my God, it's not A. And then you go talk to a therapist or a friend or an advisor, and they'll go, oh, well, like maybe it's not A or B. Maybe it's some combination of both, or maybe it's something completely different. What about C? And then you'll look at that and you'll analyze, and you'll be like, oh my God, because someone reassured you it was the right thing. Suddenly you'll feel this great sense of peace, and you'll be like, oh my God, see, I can't believe I didn't think about that. I'm so glad that I came and talked to you. And you'll start considering C, but you'll be setting C up to be the thing that gives you permission to no longer feel chronically anxious. And then your nervous system will tell you the truth. No, that's not what C does. And you're right back in it. And these people make decisions out of crisis, not because they chase crisis necessarily. Therapists set them up and be like, well, you thrive on chaos, the kind of people who do their term paper the night before it's due, blah, blah. No, they don't. They hate chaos. They hate it. The reason they do that over and over and over and over is because they have this erroneous unconscious program running that tells them, I can resolve my chronic anxiety by choosing the right thing. And they're always hyper-focused on choosing the right thing. So they have this black and white binary thinking, the right thing and the wrong thing. And they'll project right and wrong into the situation. But what they really mean is the right thing is a thing that makes me no longer anxious, and the wrong thing is a thing that leaves me still feeling anxious. Right? And the people who actually suffer with this the most long term are highly intelligent, highly subtle, analytical people who are capable of making the external argument about the external things sound incredibly reasoned and intelligent and well thought out, which is why everyone misses what's actually happening. You hear what I'm saying? With those people, because they're really, really smart and really, really good at analysis and good at making everything sound reasonable, when people counsel them and attempt to help support them, people think that it really is about what's the more reasonably external decision and choice and situation to choose, because the person will talk about it in a very intelligent, level-headed, reasonable way. And so no one ever realizes, oh, this person isn't actually making a decision about the situation. They're setting up the situation to try to give themselves permission to no longer feel anxious. And so no one ever has a kind and very direct conversation with them and says, hey, look, you can choose any of these things. And you might be right and you might be wrong. There's no right thing and there's no wrong thing. You can choose any of these things. But the truth is it's never going to work for you, because you're making the choice based on an unconscious desire to have the right to no longer feel anxious. And external situations don't give you that permission. So it's never going to succeed. You're never going to succeed. You need to go inside and examine yourself and ask yourself why you think that your anxiety originates from the situations that you choose. Because it doesn't, right? Okay, so there's one layer under this that I was thinking about, and I feel kind of stupid that I just realized it in the last week. I mean, I've known it. It's been there. I've said it. I've talked through it. But it was the first time that it just hit me where I was like, oh, that's the entire thing. 99% of anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive behaviors, eating disorders, addictions, like other than maybe bipolar 1, which has organic underpinnings, and schizophrenia, which definitely has organic underpinnings. 99% of all of it comes down to this one thing that no one ever says. And it's so fucking obvious that I feel stupid that I've never seen it explicitly. I have brushed up against it and pointed it out with clients, but I've never gone, oh, wait, this is the whole GD thing. This is the whole thing. Okay, so I laid out for you where people try to make decisions. Should I go to this graduate program? Should I move here? Should I marry this person? It happens a lot more intensely when it's a complex decision, where there's a lot of moving parts, where it gets a lot harder to say right, wrong, right? If you were like, hey, if you went to somebody and you're like, oh, should I pimp my daughter out to make money? No, wrong, right? So there's some super obvious shit where it's like, no, don't, that's the wrong thing to do. The right thing to do is not. Okay? But 99% of life isn't those simple moral or human questions, right? Most of it is like, should I move here? Should I take this job? It's like, nobody can really predict. I'll give you a personal example that I've talked about before. When I was in the psychology program, I had developed this real deep feeling that I wanted to work with veterans, people who are dealing with severe PTSD, who had seen war and were struggling, and I knew all the stats. We lose something like 17 veterans a day to suicide. And so I felt inspired to do this. And I went and applied at the local West LA VA, which is a huge VA program. And I was actually offered the position. But from the beginning, something felt sort of neurotic, overly clinical and detached about it, and it felt really uncomfortable. And when I went in to sign the papers and to begin training, I listened to my gut instinct and told the supervisor, I was like, you know what? I don't think this is right for me. I'm going to pass. And I moved on. And I really struggled with the decision because on paper, this was the right decision. And I had made the decision early on. I didn't really have an interest in working with homelessness, severe addiction. I don't have addiction in my family for the most part. It's not something I had a lot of instincts around. So I didn't have a deep interest in working in addiction clinics and homelessness and, blah, blah. I just didn't feel inspired by that. I felt inspired by trauma, but not that coloration of it. But then the supervisor of I forget what it's called, but when you're halfway through the program, you start, it's not interning, but it's called something else, but you start basically doing the work while you're in school under supervision. She recommended a clinic in South Central that the school had a close relationship with. And I was like, yeah, okay, I'll go, right? So I went over there and I met the supervisor, Richard Davis. And immediately it was just like, this guy has such a profound sense of connected humanity and just a seeming respect without judgment for everyone, for the clients, for the clinicians. He was a supervisor and you felt that sense of wisdom and authority from him, but you didn't feel it in the sense that he acted like he was smarter than you. In fact, anytime you came and you met with him, the first thing he would do is spend about 20 minutes just asking you what your perspective was on the case and how you were approaching it and what you thought about. And 99% of what he said was like, I really like your thinking on that. This makes sense to me because of this or that. And it seems like your instincts are in line with it and what you're doing is blah, blah, blah. And every once in a while, he'd be like, hey, what if you considered this? Like maybe try this. This might be of help, blah, blah, blah. You just really got this feeling that there was no hierarchy with this guy, that he had way more experience and wisdom, but it was just there available to you as an equal human. And I made perhaps the best decision of my entire life. Even though I had lived in central LA, South Central, so it wasn't about the neighborhood, but it was about that particular population wasn't the thing that inspired me. I was not into case management, and that sort of location you end up doing lots of case management because the client population is so overwhelmed financially. Many people don't have housing, et cetera, et cetera. So you end up working with housing, working with food, working with the county to provide money. Even at one point, there were vouchers to purchase furniture. I helped people, right? So this stuff was not of interest to me, but because of Richard Davis, I said yes. Best decision of my entire life. I have a successful career and I love my job as a therapist, and Richard Davis was a huge impact there, where I was not directed. He directed me. I have instincts to first be immersed in the humanity of the situation, and he doubled and tripled down on that 100%. Where other places like the VA just felt so clinical and so overly psychological. Right? So here's a situation where the right choice lined up with my vision and there was status around it, was exactly the wrong choice. And the choice that on paper seemed wrong was the best thing that I ever did. Right? At least career-wise, but also just knowing Richard Davis, I think was one of the best experiences I've ever had. He was low-key sort of like an older brother or father figure. He wasn't old enough to be a father figure, but there was some of that was there for me, something that I had never gotten before. So there you have a situation like that where it's like, you don't know, like from the external situations, you can't just look on paper and do pros and cons lists of, well, you never know what exactly the right thing is. So when people are agonizing over decisions, even if they're talking about it in reasonable, rational, intelligent ways, when they keep spinning around, 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 it's not because of the situation. It's because they're trying to use the situation to resolve their chronic anxiety. Right? Which doesn't work because their chronic anxiety doesn't come from the situation. It comes from inside them. They were coded for it as a child, and it's there now, and it's something they're going to have to confront and deal with. Okay, so here's the big, to me, what is a bigger realization than the anxiety realization. It's not just about anxiety. The anxiety is a symptom of something. It is a symptom of, if you look around at the world, I'm scared to say this, but I think it's true. All the harm, cruelty, ignorance, stupidity, meanness, pettiness, unempathetic behavior, psychopathic behavior that humans direct towards other living beings, including other humans, is an attempt to resolve the fear over my identity, over people's identity, over an intense anxiety and shame over who they think they are or who they're afraid that it might mean that they are if they lose in a situation. So let me do a little bit more of a deep dive into that, what I mean. Let's say you have a competitor, right? Someone who's a fierce competitor who really likes to win, who studies the game, who figures out this is how the game works, and if I work on these skills and work on this is where other people are weak, I can leverage this and blah, blah, blah. You can have someone who's extremely successful and competitive, but it comes from a really good energy of just looking at what the thing is itself, not making it about my identity. They're not afraid to lose. They're not afraid to have hard lessons. They're not, right? But looking at the thing itself and realizing I can immerse myself in this process and I can become exceptional at this thing because they see the thing for what it is. And the reason they're able to see the thing for what it is because they're not making it about their identity. Those people are very successful, period. They are exceptional. They achieve exceptional things. Most people who struggle with success and self-sabotage, or they work super hard and they do all the right things and they consult business coaches and life coaches and they work on their mentality and blah, blah, blah. Most people fail even if on the surface they succeed, even if they achieve a situation or a circumstance that looks successful. Most people fail because they're using the situation not to resolve their anxiety. They are. But their anxiety or their shame comes from the fact that they think that succeeding or failing in the situation means something about them. They're using the situation to try to resolve identities, identity confusion. They're using situations and circumstances to try to resolve identity confusions. They think something terrible and unbearable about themselves. When a situation pokes that button and reminds them that they think that about themselves, they become very anxious and depressed. They feel very uncomfortable. And then they will pursue a situation fiercely because they feel that if they succeed in that situation or if they can make that situation happen, it will mean that what they think about themselves is not true. And they will feel some relief from this terrible thing they think about themselves. The problem is that even if they succeed at that situation and they feel temporary relief, the belief is about their identity is inside them, and it will reactivate again and torment them again. And that situation will not be enough. And many people spend their entire lives chasing control of situations because they want the situation to prove to them that they are not something that they fear that they are. This is important, guys. This is important. All the mess out there, the cruelty, the misery, people stepping on one another, people being shallow, people valuing material success over kind of the whole mess, everything that you decry and go, why are people like this? I'm telling you, this is why. Because people believe things about themselves that are unbearable to believe. It's not active all the time, but when something gets pressed and it gets activated, they experience unbearable feelings about themselves. And they chase things in life to try to prove that that isn't true. And they're mostly not conscious of what they believe about themselves. They're not conscious of it. And so they spend their entire lives chasing something to prove to themselves that this thing is not true. And they do terrible damage because their motivation for what they're doing only factors in their attempt to escape some belief about themselves. You can't be empathetic and you can't factor in other people. You can't truly leverage your own brilliance and intelligence when you're trying to set up a situation or a circumstance to prove to yourself that some horrible thing you think about yourself isn't true, because that's something inside you that has nothing to do with the situation or circumstance. Let's put it in actual concrete terms. If you have, let's say, a teacher who feels really bad, has really low self-esteem, has a real problem with shame, feels really uncomfortable, when they go in and teach, they may work really hard at working on pedagogy and classroom management and working on all the skills and blah, blah, blah. And if you talk to them, they know all the right things to say. And this is how I configure my classroom. And I establish a system on day one of consequences for they're going to say all these really smart things. You're going to go, oh my God, they're a really good teacher. And yet their students will experience an extreme disconnection. Their students will do poorly. There will be behavior issues in their class, and their students will not feel connected or aligned with, and they will not feel understood, and they will not do well in that teacher's class. And everyone will be like, I don't get it. And they'll blame the teachers, they'll blame the parents, they'll blame the community. But the truth is, that teacher has no space or capacity. They say all the right things theoretically, intellectually, but they have no emotional capacity to be present to their students, to understand what their students are saying, to make space for their students, to respond to what their students need in the moment, because that teacher's not in the moment. They're running some program in their head trying to avoid, they're running from some terrible unconscious feeling about themselves, about something that they believe about themselves, and they're using the situation to try to prove to themselves that they are not that. And they can't really pay attention or attend to the students, because they're using the students and they're using the classroom transactionally, and they're using their teaching transactionally to prove to themselves that they're a good person, that they're not something that they fear unconsciously about themselves. So nothing they do, no matter how hard they work, actually contributes to the situation, because they're not present to the situation. Let's say a student is being abused horribly at home. Or let's say there's a student who's being molested by some personnel at the school, and they start behaving really badly and blah, blah, blah. If that teacher is in their head and that student starts behaving badly, the first thing they think is like, oh my God, here it goes. Like, oh my God, like I'm failing at classroom management, and the student is, well, and they're just going to start feeling shame and anger, and they need this situation to assuage their own ego issues. And they're going to behave badly, and they're going to shut down that student. And then that student goes on being molested for the entirety of their middle school or whatever, because there was no teacher present to the reality of it, who goes, wait a minute, this student was a good student. What happened? Why am I seeing these disturbed behaviors and the student acting out? What's going on? And start sussing it out and start exploring, and actually then the student starts trusting them, and then they have a sit down with the student and say, hey, I really want to connect with you. You're a really good person, and I really enjoy teaching you. And you're having a lot of trouble sitting still, and you're making sarcastic remarks and sort of disturbing the class. Are you okay? And then that student opens up and says, hey, there's this janitor who keeps following me in the bathroom and touching me, and I feel really gross and sick, and I'm afraid to tell my parents. Well, okay, that teacher is now present to what's actually happening, because they're not making it about trying to escape some negative thing that they believe about themselves. They're present to the student. Okay, that's just one situation that I'm spinning to explain to you how when we're negligent or hurtful of other people, it is always because we have some profoundly negative belief about ourselves that we're trying to escape, and it's not there all the time. We don't feel it all the time, right? I have severe self-esteem issues in certain situations, but I don't feel it when I go mountain biking, which is why I love mountain biking so much. When I go mountain biking, I'm just me, with unfettered by all the bullshit that, right? So what I love about mountain biking isn't even necessarily mountain biking. What I love about mountain biking is I get to enjoy myself. That's it. You probably have the same things. Right? So these beliefs are not active all the time, but they're there all the time underneath, kind of driving things. And when there's certain situations, press the button, that person is no longer present to the actual situation. They're in a war, they're in a propaganda war to attempt to make something about themselves be not true. And they're trying to use the situation as if I succeed in the situation, it will mean that it's not true. But the problem is the belief is inside me. There is no situation that can make it untrue because the situation has no relationship to what I believe about myself. Right? When I talked through us losing our home and how profoundly healing, there were profoundly healing things about it. When we lost our home to the wildfires and we were literally homeless, I had my 2 kids and a pair, the outfit that we were wearing. And we jumped to probably 4 or 5 different homes within a month. And it was incredibly stressful, emotionally overwhelming. And I noticed these feelings of abandonment and rage and, all of these things, feeling naked and alone in the world, et cetera, et cetera. And given all the warmth and love and support that I got from the human community, I had to acknowledge to myself that these feelings that I'm having are not actually about the wildfire. It's not what's actually true. I was loved and I was supported and I was cared for. That's what was true. So those feelings of abandonment, I traced them back to, amongst many experiences, but one of the experiences was my parents pretty consistently picking up my brothers and sisters and forgetting me at school, and then getting into arguments in front of me about who was supposed to pick me up, and how terribly that wounded me, and how horrible I felt, and how sad. And that I had developed this unconscious feeling, this belief that I'm such a worthless piece of shit that not even my parents can be bothered to come pick me up after school. I saw it. I saw the belief. And that belief had then resulted in this coping mechanism of me going, well, I'm a moral good person and other people are full of shit. Humans are full of shit. They're total assholes. And I have a right to isolate myself and to stay away from them, which turned into this very arrogant, condescending. It was very quiet because I was too smart to really be externally arrogant the way my father was. I'd learned that lesson. But my coping skill of being morally arrogant was actually a coping skill, was an attempt to deal with this horrible feeling that I had, this belief that I had. And then I had to acknowledge this belief has driven everything. It's driven my relationships to other people. It's driven, how I've pursued career or not pursued career. It's driven my romantic relationships or not. It's driven how I talk about myself, how I think, what I read, everything. And to a certain extent, everything I did was an attempt to make this not true, or to accept that it was true and to make it someone else's fault that it was true. When the fact is, it just isn't true. I don't need to make it true or not make it true. It just isn't true. It's simply not true that I'm a worthless piece of shit who's so worthless that even my parents can't be bothered to pick me up from school. Like, that's sad that that happened, but it's simply not true. It's an erroneous belief about me. But then I would have had to have narcissistically worked super hard in every situation to avoid the shame and that terribly uncomfortable feeling that would come up. But that didn't honor other people, and it didn't honor who they were, and it didn't honor my dynamic with them. I was constantly using situations and using relationships to attempt to soften and to avoid that terrible feeling of shame and abandonment. But I didn't have to avoid it because it wasn't true in the first place. It simply factually isn't true. right? Okay, so there's my situation. So what I'm telling you is the real realization was all the pain and suffering and conflict and cruelty and misery and pettiness and propaganda and meanness and selfishness and sociopathy and lack of empathy, well, all of it out there, all of it out there is because we are all spiritual beings having a human experience who have internalized these erroneous beliefs about who and what we are. We've internalized these erroneous beliefs, whether it's I'm such a worthless piece of shit that not even my parents can be bothered to pick me up, or whether it's I'm a filthy piece of meat that's only good for being touched for other people's pleasure, right? Molestation, whether it's my mom was so depressed all the time and I wasn't worth enough for her to work on that so that she could experience me and talk to me and have a relationship with me. She had a relationship with her depression. Therefore, I'm not worth it. Whatever it is, right? Psychology and therapy deals with this shit all the time. But in the end, all of those beliefs are erroneous. They are not what you are. And all the misery and suffering in the world is because humans, these spiritual beings having a human experience, have internalized in their biology these untrue beliefs. And as we spin out and try to decide, I should do this or I should do that, or this person behaved this way, should I confront them or not? Is it okay for me to just be like, hey, you're a fucking asshole? Or do I just let it go and walk away and then I feel kind of gross about myself because I didn't defend? Like all of these decisions that we agonize about, that we go to therapists to consult and try to figure out. We talk to life coaches, we talk to a wise friend, like whatever, all of the constant agonizing and ruminating to try to figure it out, all of it is because we have an internalized, unconscious belief about who and what we are that's wrong, and we're trying to use the situation or circumstance to prove to us that it's not true. And the reason we spend our entire lives chasing is because the situation or the circumstance can't make it not true. It literally isn't true. There isn't anything that can or needs to be done. Let's say, right, I had experiences that convinced me at a profound level that I'm such a worthless piece of shit that even my parents can't be bothered to pick me up from middle school. That was just one experience. My parents did many really sick things. I internalized that belief. Let's say I moved to another country, met another culture. They were warm and loving, and I developed a relationship with people who became like my parents and blah, blah, blah. And I had this sudden healing realization, this profound realization. I am loved, I'm valued, I'm worth love, I'm beautiful, blah, blah, blah. You could say, yeah, but that situation and circumstance helped you make it not true. No, it didn't help make it not true. It only showed me what was already true. That internalized belief was not true when my parents mistakenly treated me that way. Even it was intentional. It was a mistake on their part to treat one of their children that way. Let's say I moved to another country and those people abuse me even worse. That belief still isn't true. There is no situation or circumstance that can make something true about you, or that can make something or can convince you that something is not true about you. Sometimes we use situations and circumstances to reveal to ourselves what is already true. A couple years prior to our home burning, I had chosen to become part of a community that's profoundly beautiful, loving, that's working on sorting out all of these spiritual knots and challenges, and there's a lot of respect and profound offering of dignity to one another, et cetera, et cetera. So when our home burned, that community stepped up and embraced us and supported us and offered us love and blah. And through that experience, I remembered what was true about me, but it had been true about me 5 years prior, 10 years prior, 15 years prior, 20 years prior. It was true about me when my parents were treating me like shit. It was true that I was a beautiful spiritual being capable of expressing love, intelligence, creating beautiful things, contributing. That was true back then when they were shitting on me. It was an erroneous belief, not a true belief. So when you have a healing experience, it's not that, again, a lot of people come into therapy and they're chasing self-esteem as if they can build self-esteem. You can't build self-esteem. You can only remember what was already true, which was the negative, terrible thing that you believe about yourself was never true in the first place. It wasn't true. It wasn't true then, it's not true now, and it's not going to be true tomorrow. When you see people spinning and searching and trying to figure out, should I do this and should I do that, blah, blah, they're not doing it because they lack the intelligence and the ability to do a pros cons list and they need you to do it. They're doing it because they need someone to say, hey, you're setting up this situation and circumstance to try to prove something about yourself, to try to make yourself feel better about yourself by choosing the right thing and doing the right thing. And that situation and circumstance can't change that belief because the belief isn't true in the first place. There's nothing to be done about something that's not true. Let me give you another example. If someone has a beautiful yellow car, it's the softest, most stunning, beautiful yellow. It looks like the sun shining. It's just this beautiful yellow car. And that's just an objective fact. And someone walks up to the driver and goes, your car is the ugliest, shittiest, most drab, boring gray I've ever seen. Can that driver, does that driver need to do anything to make the accusation of gray not true? They don't need to do anything. Should they go out and study the color gray and what's the best way to remove the color gray? What's the best way to convince people to see my car as not yellow, as not gray, but actually yellow? Do they need to do that? If the entire world comes to that person and erroneously says, you have the most boring, drab, ugly, gray car we've ever seen, and it's erroneous, does the owner of the car need to go do a scientific test to prove to those people that it's actually a brilliant, beautiful, shining yellow? They don't, because you can't disprove an erroneous belief, because the error is in the heads of the people who believe the error. The error is in the heads of the people who believe the error. And if you engage this whole program of making it not true, I'm going to make it not true that my car is gray. Well, it's not gray. There's nothing to be done. It isn't gray. It isn't gray. What are you going to do? Spend your entire life proving that your car is not gray? If you do that, all you're doing is actually making your life about having a gray car or not. And it's not a great car. So what's the fucking point? You're spending all your time making your life about your car being gray or not. And it isn't. It's not gray. The person who said it's gray is full of shit. And if you internalize the belief that you're beautiful, shining, brilliant, softly glowing yellow car is actually gray, there's nothing to be done. Because you can go, oh, I'm going to drive to this other town. And if this town is the right situation for me, it'll prove to me that my car isn't gray. It's actually a brilliant yellow. Yeah, but you're the one who believes it's gray. So you could go to that town and all those people could go like, dude, your car's not gray. It's the most beautiful, soft, shining yellow. It doesn't matter because you're the one who decided that it's gray, that you have to prove that it's not gray. You're trying to avoid the truth of this thing that isn't true in the first place. And the reason you're trying to avoid it is because you're the one who thinks it's true. Now, other people might participate in that and say, you're right, it is true. And other people might argue with you, but it doesn't matter which one. Because if other people participate in it and say, you're right, it is an ugly gray, and you feel really bad and ashamed, the bad feeling and the shame is only telling you that you believe something about yourself that's not true. It's a warning signal. It's a gauge going, wake up, erroneous belief, wake up, erroneous belief. That's what those feelings of shame and discomfort and anxiety are. It's not about whether you should or should not choose a situation. It's telling you you believe something about yourself that's not true in the first place. And you can choose whatever you decide to choose. It doesn't matter. It's not going to change what you believe about yourself. I moved 1,200 miles away from my parents and I traveled all over the world and I did nothing that had anything to do with my parents. I became a musician and my parents didn't give a shit about music, and I became a philosopher, and my dad was a philosopher, but he didn't respect it as a endeavor. And my mom is a very concrete thinker and she thinks all that's full of crap. Well, like I did all of that stuff. None of that revealed to me that I was always a beautiful, valuable, spiritual being. None of it. Throughout my entire life, some people told me, oh, you're really interesting. I love talking to you. We love you. You're a great guy. And I would momentarily feel better because someone was telling me, oh, your car's not gray. Don't worry. Oh, thank God my car's not gray. But I'm the one who has the belief that my car's gray. So the next person who goes, oh my God, your car is the ugliest, drabbest gray. Boom, the shame comes up again. Well, again, the shame is not a punishment. The shame is a powerful signal going, look inward, you have an erroneous belief. Look inward, you have an erroneous belief. You believe something about yourself that this situation and circumstance can neither make true or untrue. You're the one who makes it true. I'm the one. Look, my parents abused me. And them forgetting me repeatedly in middle school and not picking me up is abusive and shitty. I'm not forgiving them or letting them off the hook. But what I'm saying is I internalized and constructed the belief that I was a worthless piece of shit, that I was such a worthless piece of shit that even my parents couldn't be bothered to pick me up. I constructed that belief and I walked around. It's my belief. I maintained it. I'm not blaming my abuse on me. That's on them. That's the situation and circumstance. But the belief was maintained by me. And the belief had to be given up by me. The belief had to be given up by me. I could give you an infinite number of examples, but I won't. I'll close for now. A recap. There are those sorts of people who, though intelligent, level-headed, wise, smart, capable of complex thought, abstract thinking, will agonize over decisions and spin and spin and spin, and they never come to a comfortable decision. That's because it's not about the situation or circumstance. They're using the situation and circumstance to try to give themselves permission to no longer feel anxious or feel ashamed. And the situation and the circumstance is never going to do that. because their anxiety, their fear, and their shame does not come from the situation and circumstance. It comes from the fact that they hold a belief about who and what they are, and the belief is erroneous. I'm going to go on a little bit longer. I've said this before. You need to really think about what a profound fact it is that when people come into therapy struggling with PTSD, anxiety, depression, blah, 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 you're always working with the fact that they believe things about themselves. And when they successfully heal, you do EMDR, you do whatever it is, they successfully heal. Not once has anyone ever healed and gone, oh my God, I realize that I actually factually am a worthless piece of shit. Not once does that ever happen. They always just come to a free and easy feeling of like, oh, I'm beautiful. I'm a beautiful, loving being, and I can make something of my life. I might have bad experiences, good experiences. People might be mean to me, whatever, but it doesn't matter. That doesn't change who and what I am. I'm a beautiful, loving, present being. Why is it that that's the realization once you dump all the neurotic bullshit, that the realization is that you're beautiful and that you're loving and that you're worthy of love? How come no one ever realizes they actually are a worthless piece of shit? Really? Why is that? You know in your gut that that's how it works. That's because we are all beautiful, loving, spiritual beings, profoundly and infinitely worthy of love. We're powerful. We're able to create beautiful things. We're able to be in communion with other living beings and to create beautiful dynamics and beautiful things that's beautiful, creative, enjoyable, exuberant, wondrous for all of us. That is who and what we truly are. Anything you believe other than that is what creates the anxiety, the depression, the discomfort, the shame that you experience. And then if you go and chase situations and circumstances to alleviate yourself of the shame, anxiety, depression, and discomfort, you're caught in an endless loop because the situation and the circumstance cannot make you who and what you are. It's just something that you create experiences in. Who and what you are is and has always been true. You are a beautiful spiritual being who is loving, who is worthy of love, infinitely worthy of love. You are exuberant, you are creative, you are wise. You cannot be harmed by your experiences. Your experiences cannot make you something less than you are. You can use a situation to convince yourself of something untrue. And once you convince yourself of that thing that is untrue, you will experience the anxiety, depression, shame, eating disorders, addictions, anger, violence, the whole thing. Because the only challenge of the human race and the human condition and human situation, the only challenge is that we have separated ourselves from true knowledge of ourselves. And once we did that, shame, anxiety, addictions, depressions, anger, violence arise because those are the symptoms of what it is to feel separated from self. And in order to maintain separation from self, we must believe something that is untrue. I'm worthless. I'm stupid. I'm not good enough. I'm violent. I'm silly. I'm not worth taking seriously. I'm not good. I'm not as smart as other people. All of that shit is actually the symptom of you separating yourself from what you truly are. Those things that people work on are the symptom of you separating yourself from what you truly are. And you can go into therapy, and the therapist could be like, oh, I experience you as a really wonderful person. I like you. And they can encourage you to work on your self-esteem or build self-esteem. It's not going to work. You can't convince yourself that you don't have a drab gray car when you don't have a drab gray car. You're the one who believes that you do or convince yourself that you do. It was not true in the first place. You can't have an argument about something that's not true. There's nothing to be argued. It's simply not true. Okay? All the human condition, all the misery and suffering is a result of people who are using situations and circumstances to try to prove to themselves that some lie that they believe about themselves isn't true. But situations and circumstances and other people can't do anything about it because they're the ones who believe something untrue about themselves. And there's nothing to be done about it. You can't argue about it. You can't prove it's not true by achieving things and interacting with, you're the one who believes it. You're the one who believes it. If you want to help the world heal, maybe you don't go out and combat violence and sign petitions and maybe you don't write things and rail against the government and violence and the stupidity of the current administration, and maybe what you do is recognize that your own discomfort, shame, anxiety, discomfort comes from the fact that you're doing the same thing they are. You're chasing situations and circumstances to try to prove that something that was never true isn't true, thereby making your entire life about arguing about something that isn't true in the first place, which is a way of making it true as an illusion. You maintain the illusion by arguing about the truth or falsity of the illusion. You hear me? You maintain the illusion by arguing about the truth or falsity of the illusion. Do you want the illusion to collapse? Stop talking about it and stop arguing about it and accept that it is not true and never was true. Just come back to working on anything that allows you to experience your true self. You are joyful. You are loving. You are profoundly, infinitely worthy of love. You are creative. You are wise. You are infinite. You cannot be damaged by your experiences. This is the immutable truth. This cannot be obscured by illusion. If you generate an illusion by believing something else and then animate it, it is only the power and creativity of that beautiful, powerful being that's capable of animating the illusion. You hear me? I'm saying that again. If an illusion appears to have power, it is only because a beautiful, loving, powerful, creative being is the only thing powerful enough to animate an illusion. So it is the energy and the creativity of true reality that's animating and making the illusion appear true. The moment you return to the simple truth, I am powerful, beautiful, loving, worthy of love, I don't need to compete to make myself one thing or the other. It is what I am. The illusion collapses. You don't need to battle the illusion. Simply walk away from it. You don't need to battle the illusion. Simply walk away from it. Love you guys. See you next time.
Just for today, everything's okay. Everything's okay.